What's up everyone? As you guys know, I love going back and revisiting older phones that were just released. Now this phone, the OnePlus 5, the successor to this phone is going to be coming out within the next couple weeks. Not even that late, literally it's around the corner. And so I wanted to go look at the past couple versions. I already looked at the OnePlus 6. I should have got the OnePlus 5T, I didn't even think about it. But the OnePlus 5 was the last OnePlus phone that had the home button. So I kind of want to see how this phone holds up in the later part of 2018. You know, we have the OnePlus 6 coming out, or the OnePlus 6T coming out. So it's kind of cool. I mean, I'm going to definitely compare this to the OnePlus 6T and also the OnePlus 6 to the 6T as well. So, and honestly, as soon as I got this phone, and this was pretty much beaten to death when this phone came out, but this phone resembles the iPhone 8 Plus, more so the iPhone 7 Plus like crazy. The matte black one, that's really the only disadvantage of the body because you do have the dual camera setup, and it's just the way this phone really looks like that. Now, am I going to say that this phone completely copied it? Absolutely not. I think this phone is a little bit faster than the iPhone 7 Plus, but just in general, I mean, the biggest downside would probably be the way this phone looks. I mean, looking around the body, we have pretty big bezels, and this was at a time where, you know, bezel-less phones weren't really popping off as much. I mean, this was just released, you know, last year in June, so a little bit over a year ago. But even at this time, we had the Galaxy S8 that came out. That was pretty much bezel-less, not bezel-less, but it had very small bezels on it. So I feel like OnePlus really could have taken an initiative and really lowered the bezels, which they eventually did with the OnePlus 5T. But still, you kind of have to, you know, remember that this phone has a little bit of bezel on it, but the bezel is kind of useful. We do have a fingerprint sensor on the bottom and capacitive buttons, so you are able to rearrange those buttons if you want to different things. And the front panel is actually 5.5 inches. It's AMOLED, so you're going to get all those sharp pixels and everything. It's 1080p, and it's not the sharpest screen in the world, but you know, I would rather have a 1080p AMOLED than a 1440p LCD, and that's just me. But yeah, the screen is definitely a strong suit. I really like this screen. I think honestly 1080p is all we need. Anything below 1080p in 2018 is definitely not good. And going forward, I mean, you guys already know the iPhone XR. I mean, I don't know what they're doing with that, but hopefully phone makers really start pushing at least 1080p panels on their screens moving forward. Now this phone does have USB Type-C. It also retains the headphone jack, so if you're in the market for a phone that has something like that, you can definitely get this. Now this phone doesn't feel the most premium. I mean, I definitely say apparently it is aluminum on the back, but I don't know, it doesn't feel, I don't know, it's probably just me, but yeah, this phone doesn't feel that cheap at all. Now, one thing about the OnePlus series is that they actually create their own software for it. So they used to, little history lesson, they used to go and link up with Cyanogen. And this phone was, when the OnePlus 1 came out, it was pretty much like the Cyanogen mod phone. And then Cyanogen and OnePlus eventually broke up. I think they were cheating on each other. So then the OnePlus kind of branched off and made their own software, which they eventually named Oxygen OS. And I actually like Oxygen OS a lot. I know a lot of people out there don't even talk about it at all, but it's as stock as Android as you can get without being stock Android, if that makes any sense. You have things like TouchWiz and LG's UI and even Sony making their whatever. I definitely think Oxygen OS is definitely very, very good, just because you do have things that you can customize. So I'll tell you a couple. You can customize the buttons on the bottom because they are capacitive buttons. They're not on the screen. You do have the option of putting an on-screen nav button, but I don't know why you do that. And you can turn on the backlight on the buttons as well. You can press the power button twice for the camera if you ever want to do that, and you can literally change so much stuff about it. And you can do different gestures like double tap to wake and things like that, and I really like Oxygen OS a lot. Now, one thing pertaining to the software is that with this phone, for some reason it still hasn't gotten Android 9 yet. I'm pretty sure it's going to. It started off getting Android 7.1.1 and it is right now upgradable to Android 8.1, but I find it weird because on my OnePlus 6 it already has Android Oreo on it. So I checked for the updates and I kept checking and I couldn't find an upgrade for it. So I'll just leave it at that. I'll check it later, maybe, hopefully there's one, but I didn't check an announcement for OnePlus yet, so they might have, they might not. But if I do find any news, I'll update you guys on Twitter. But yeah, that's definitely what it is. But the software for this thing, I really like it a lot. And kind of going forward, I mean, what's the point of having even the latest version of Android if it gets Android Pie, if your phone isn't functioning good, if it doesn't have the greatest specs at the time? Now, you guys know me, I don't really care about the latest and greatest, but pertaining to this phone specs, it has the Snapdragon 835 chipset, it has an octa-core CPU, and depending on the variant you get, it either has 6 gigabytes of RAM or 8 gigabytes of RAM, which is the same type of RAM management thing, RAM sizes that we have on the OnePlus 6 and potentially on the OnePlus 6T as well. This phone, in terms of the performance of it, I find absolutely no problems with at all. This phone is blazing fast, and as it should be. I mean, it's only a year old. Barely. It's a little bit over a year old, and most phones at this level are still functioning perfectly fine. Now, I find this kind of weird. I think this phone is still faster than the Google Pixel 2 XL that was released a little bit after this phone, but I also think it's faster than the Galaxy S9, which was released after this phone too. And I think the reason this phone is faster is more so because it has more RAM, but also because it's pretty much stock Android. And I really think this thing just blazes fast. Like when I'm like opening apps, closing apps, it just like, it almost seems like it's instantaneous. And I really like the little like fluid motions of it, like the closing and opening like, little animations they have. I think it's really, really cool. Now it does sometimes take like a second to open up an app, but it's really not that big of a deal at all. And in terms of performance, I don't have anything to complain about at all. And another thing in terms of gaming and everything, dude, this phone is perfectly fine at gaming too. Like I was playing Real Racing 3 and I don't think I've ever seen a phone, even with I think the OnePlus 6 is obviously faster. This phone, I mean, I've never seen a phone play Real Racing 3 like as clear as this phone did. Now, if you guys don't know, like I always say, most heavier intensive games do benchmark in the background to see whether they need to up in or lower the graphics. And this phone, the OnePlus 6, you could throw in the Google Pixel and the Galaxy S9 in it too, but that pool of phones, it really just like plays Real Racing 3 like amazingly, if that's even a word. Even with my iPhone 10, which is my main phone, I don't think it plays it as well as maybe something like this OnePlus 5. Like I said, it's as expected. I mean, this thing has 6 gigabytes of RAM. It's like a very, very good phone in terms of performance. But I want to say one more thing. I think it might have something to do also with the 1080p display, because most phones do have 1440p or Quad HD displays. Since this thing only has a 1080p display, that might have something to do with it as well, but it doesn't have everything to do with it. This phone is very good in performance regardless. Now, moving on to something that is kind of strange. The camera on the back, like I said, it really resembles the 7 Plus, but that's okay. It has a 16 megapixel camera and a 20 megapixel camera as well. Now with that other lens, it allows you to do a little bit more zooming into a photo, and it pretty much just adds more into a photo. Now you are able to shoot 4K at 30 frames per second and 1080p, but only up to 60 frames per second, which is weird. I was expecting them to go up to at least like 1080p at 120 or even 4K at 60. You know, this phone isn't like really old. It was just released last year. So, I mean, that technology existed then, but I mean, it is what it is. I don't want to give them too much flack for it, even though I should, but you can't really change this phone at the time because it's already released. But what I will say though is this camera is okay. You know, I mean, it's definitely good. Like compared to something like an iPhone 5, like yes, this phone is better, or even the OnePlus 1, but it just seems like, I don't know, it just seems like it's lacking something. It doesn't seem like it pops out as much. This phone does have portrait mode kind of as well, but even at this level, it just seems like it's kind of strange. I don't know, it just doesn't look as good. Even when I look back at the photos, I mean, it's definitely decent photos, like it definitely takes photos, that's no problem, but I just don't think it's like as sharp as maybe something as like a Galaxy phone or a Google Pixel 2 XL, which is expected because this phone doesn't cost as much as those phones. But at the same time, it actually kind of does. Used prices now, I've seen the Galaxy S8s, the Google Pixels, all around the same price. The Google Pixel 2 XLs actually too. So kind of weird that that is the case. But I mean, it is what it is. You can't complain too much about it. It also has a 16 megapixel front-facing camera, which is good as well, 1080p videos on it. But in terms of the cameras on this phone, it's not amazing. Factoring in the age, I would have expected more out of a camera on this phone, honestly. I'd probably rate it like a 7 out of 10 when you factor in the age. You know, it should have been better at the time, but this phone does kind of make up for it in other areas. So just because, you know, it doesn't have the best camera, I mean, it definitely takes photos, no doubt. Like it takes photos. You will probably be happy with it if you aren't really trying to critique it at all, but you know, it is what it is, and I don't think it's a horrible camera. Again, if you're getting this phone, I don't think you're going to expect a DSLR type quality out of it versus something maybe out of like a Google Pixel 3 XL or something like that. So that's kind of where I'm going to leave that at. Now, this phone also has a 3,300 mAh battery. It is actually not that bad. It's pretty good battery life overall. Again, like you have to remember that this phone is pretty performance heavy, but even at that level, it's pretty much stock Android. There's not a lot of things going on in the background. And it also has a 1080p display, so it's not really take a lot of power out of this phone to even to run it or keep the screen on. But the battery size isn't like amazingly crazy. It's not like a 4,000 mAh battery, but 3,300 mAh is definitely respectable. If I took my exact same usage and put it on the OnePlus 5, I would definitely be able to get a day out of it. And since this phone is only like a year old, the battery hasn't deteriorated too much, so I wouldn't really worry about this phone like having a horrible battery life or anything like that when you get it. I just really hope it does get Android Pie, because I did hear that with Android Pie's update with the OnePlus 6, battery life has gone up a little bit. So having that type of effect on the OnePlus 5 would be really cool as well. So hopefully it does get it. And that's pretty much where I'm going to leave that at in terms of the whole hardware. Now, one thing that does kind of suck, this phone does not have Qi wireless charging. This phone, like I said, it came out in 2017. I would have expected it, but it is what it is. You know, you can't go back and add it in now or tell OnePlus to add it in. But that is one thing I would have loved to see and love to actually like advertise people like, hey, this phone has Qi wireless charging, get it. But I don't even use wireless charging, but it is kind of weird when phones don't have it, especially ones that were released even not even a year ago. So that's pretty much where I'm going to leave that at. But some other notable things to note, this phone does have a dual SIM option, so you can put in 2 nano SIMs. So that's pretty cool for a lot of like international people, even people in the USA or whatever. That's pretty cool too. Like I said, this phone runs its own pretty much operating system. It's Oxygen OS, it's on Android and everything like that. It's like stock Android, but with more features pretty much. That's the best way I can explain it. This phone does come in 2 variants and storage sizes, 64 and 128 gigabyte variants. Now, in order to get the 8 gigabytes of RAM on it, you would have to get the 128 gigabyte option. But if you get the 64 gig option, you get 6 gigabytes of RAM as well. So I know I said gigabytes wrong, guys. I'm sorry. It's just my accent, but I'll definitely say the 64 gigabyte option is definitely still feasible. It's definitely not bad at all. That is the option I have, and I think the performance is really, really good. So to answer the question, is the OnePlus 5 still worth it in the later part of 2018, even going into 2019? I'll say yes, 100%. This phone is completely worth it. It does look a little dated, no doubt. It has a lot of bezel on it. It doesn't look like a $1,000 device anymore because it was never a $1,000 device. The OnePlus 6 actually looks like a crazy, like an expensive phone, and it feels pretty expensive too. But what I'll say is that this phone, if you can get one for around 300, probably less than 300, it's still a very good option. You could definitely get at least another year out of it in terms of just performance. Even if it doesn't get another Android version, you can still keep it on Android 8.1 and, rock out with it. I don't think performance is going anywhere, but I will probably recommend you to wait until the OnePlus 6T is announced to pick one up, just because these prices are going to go down even lower. So that the OnePlus 6T is about to get released in not even 2 weeks from now. So I'd recommend you guys to wait on for that and let these prices go down a little bit more so that you guys can go snag them for less than 300 hopefully, and then go from there. But I'll leave some links in the description below if you want to pick up a OnePlus 5. I would recommend getting it through that link so you can help support the channel. But also, if you ever want to buy anything, it doesn't have to be a phone or anything. If you need to buy anything through Amazon, bookmark that link, dude, so you can help support the channel. It helps me do things like giveaways and do more reviews like this, so I would really appreciate that. It doesn't cost you any money or anything, but that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. That is linked down below too. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check those out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.